Welcome everyone to the first part of our graphing lecture. Now, I know that for some of you, you might have a lot of experience with graphing, but others of you may not have. So we're going to go over graphing in a pretty basic way. And this first part of our lecture, we're going to talk about the parts of a graph, how to interpret lines, what different lines might mean on a graph, and direct versus indirect relationships. Now, what are graphs and why do we care about them as economists? So graphs are a visual representation of numerical data. They basically make it easier for us to see patterns in data and to explain those patterns to other people rather than just looking at a bunch of numbers in a table. And they can help us to answer questions about trends, what we think might happen in the future given a certain set of circumstances, and about models, which are basically a simplified representation of reality. Most often, economists end up using line graphs like this one to look at data. And this is a simple graph that's looking at produce sales over time. So here is a blank graph, and there are three labels that are very, very important on every graph. One of them is the title. Up here, we need to know what it is that this graph is trying to tell us. Then we have the vertical axis label. It can go here. It can also go kind of sideways along this vertical axis. And then we have our horizontal graph axis label down here. Now the vertical axis is what we call the y-axis, whereas the horizontal axis is what we call the x-axis. Now for this exercise, we are going to pretend that we are flower farmers, and we want to find out how many bouquets we can sell at a farmer's market with different prices. So we're going to label our graph. On the y-axis, we have our bouquet price, and on our x-axis, we have the quantity, or the number of bouquets sold. Now in economics, we typically place the price on the y-axis. That's just the convention. That's how people do it. And we can also refer to a y value and an x value as being variables. Now we have independent variables and we have dependent variables. An independent variable is the variable whose value is not affected by a change in another variable. The dependent variable is the variable whose value changes in response to a change in the other variable. So, do we think that the number of bouquets we sell is going to have an effect on the price of bouquets? No, it's really the other way around. The price that we choose to set for our bouquets determines the number of bouquets we sell. So the bouquets sold, our quantity sold, is our dependent variable, and the price is our independent variable. Now, I know this can be a little bit confusing, but it makes it a little simpler if you think about the independent variable being the cause and the dependent variable being the effect. So the price is the cause of a change in the quantity. All right, back to our graph. How is data represented on a graph? Well, it's represented in one way is in points on the graph. Now, if you've done graphing before, you'll probably remember that a point represents a pair of numbers. We have an x value and a y value. So this point here says that we sell 4 bouquets when we charge $11 for them. So we always represent it with the x value first and the y value second. So this point would be 4, 11. And in the next video, we will go over plotting more points and specifically plotting points from a table, which is often how we end up getting data. Now let's talk a little bit about what different types of lines would mean on this graph. So a perfectly flat horizontal line would mean that if we charge $11 here, we sell all of these numbers of bouquets. So we sell 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That doesn't really make much sense for this scenario. So you're probably not going to see a horizontal line on a graph that's indicating price and quantity. But what would a vertical line mean? A vertical line would basically mean that no matter what price you charge, you always sell the same number of bouquets. Now that doesn't really make sense, right? If you charged $17 for a bouquet versus $3 for a bouquet, you probably wouldn't sell the same quantity. You probably wouldn't always sell 6. What about this line? This line tells us that as our price increases, the number of bouquets we sell also increases. Well, think about it. Does that make sense? If we were to charge $50 for one bouquet, do you think we would sell more bouquets than if we charged $10 for them? No, probably not. That's not really how people behave. People like to buy more of things when they have to pay less for them. So this red line, what this says is that as the price goes down, the quantity you sell goes up. Now that is the most likely scenario for this type of graph, right? Lower the price and people buy more. So this red line, this is showing what we call an indirect relationship. In an indirect relationship, one variable goes up while the other variable goes down. So we have price increasing and quantity decreasing. Or we have price decreasing, quantity increasing. It's an indirect relationship. The variables go opposite of one another. In a direct relationship, which is represented by the blue line, both variables go up and both variables go down together. As price increases, the number sold also increases. As price decreases, the number sold also decreases. That's a direct relationship. A direct relationship is probably not something that we're going to see on a price versus quantity graph. We're more likely to see an indirect relationship. Okay, so let's do a quick review of what we learned in this video. We talked about the vertical axis being the y-axis. In economics, this is usually the independent variable, usually price, that goes on the y-axis. The horizontal axis is the x-axis, and that is the dependent variable in economics. If you've taken a bunch of other science classes, you might be thinking, wait, that's the opposite of what I learned in chemistry or in biology. And that's true. So In many other sciences, they place the independent variable on the x-axis and the dependent variable on the y-axis. In economics, however, we usually put price on the y-axis, and that's usually the independent variable. We talked about plotting points, the x and y, finding where they intersect to plot the point on the graph. We talked about direct relationships versus indirect relationships. Direct relationships being that as one variable increases, the other variable also increases, or vice versa. And indirect relationships where one variable increases and the other variable decreases, and vice versa.